Hi, my name's Nick Klevisha with Martian Radio Theater, and today we have a few guests joining us. We have Lauren and Mike. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Super hype.
Hell yeah. Well, we have here today a bucket of, let's go ahead and bring these guys out. A bucket of Legos. So let's start building. Now, do you guys have anything in mind? Or you're just gonna let the what's your process?
Gonna let the spirits decide.
Yeah, I'm letting the inner child go. So who knows?
So I saw Cro-Mags a long time ago at it was like a weird venue. I think it was like it might have been the Palladium, and it was like an intense show because they played, I think it was Cro-Mags, and it was like Suicidal Tendencies.
Oh, yes.
And that was like an intense show. Like I've never been in a pit quite like that before.
The first time I saw them was, I think, 1999. And the John Joseph, the singer, and Harley, the bassist, had just reformed. They had broken up, and they're broken. I mean, they're just like, it's hilarious to see what has gone on with their relationship because they hate each other so much, and everyone just wants this reunion because it's like you guys created one of the most iconic records ever, and it was one of the most terrifying. I think I was 16 or 17, and it was just this. There were all these massive old punks and there were these guys doing push-ups in the middle of the floor, and I'm like, I'm gonna die today. Like my existential dread is fever pitch right now, but it was one of those experiences where I was like, if I died today, I went out doing something that actually mattered. Like, wow.
So how did you get into the punk scene? I feel like everyone has a. I usually picture like older siblings.
That's exactly what it was. I grew up in South Boston and Roxbury, so we grew up near, the Rat, and I didn't get to go to the Channel. I did go to the Rat, and then the Berwick, and there were a bunch of venues in that area. So we used to just go there, and my brother got me into. He brought me to a show at the Rat when I was 8. He was babysitting me. And he's like, we're going. And I was like, no. He's like, I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were on or something. And I was like, I don't want to go. But I went, and it was horrifying, but there was just something there that I could not possibly understand at the age of 8. So by the time I was 10 or 11, I started listening to these bands, and it was like, Suicidal Tendencies was one of the first, where it was like, this is a revelation. Like, I never want to listen to like whatever I was listening to prior to that. I never want to listen to it again.
My friend Craig is in Dad Doxer, but Craig's actually like my first exposure to anything in the punk scene at all.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm definitely like a late bloomer in that capacity. So very grateful for them for showing me the way.
Neither of my parents really listened to music at all, so like I had like sort of a void of musical exposure, and I don't have like older siblings in the States. But basically, I was just like, all I watched was like whatever was on MTV before the bus picked me up. So my favorite song at the time was like Silver Sun Pickups, Lazy Eye, and then Move Along by the All American. The Dirty. I did this last time. The American Rejects Who Are Dirty. That's the one. And then my friend Sean actually, whose Legos we're playing with right now, showed me this way to find music through blog spots on Google. You would like type the band name and then like download and blogspot, and it would show you this like really cool music thread. And the first thing I listened to, like what's this song called? She Ionizes and Atomizes by Modest Mouse. And like I remember being in my room and like the shivers, and just listening to it over and over again, being like, this is so different, And then like later on, like, just sort of trying to find any sort of like music subculture, because I felt like those always had like the most unique people.
Yeah, there's one of my buddies. Most of them live in Lowell, Los Bungalitos.
Yeah. Enrique?
Enrique, we've known each other for, it's almost 20 years. And so we've known those guys, and we used to go to shows together all the time. And it was funny because we were just talking about, like, we're like adults now, allegedly. But, we're not different. We're just like, we still listen to the same bands. We still just like, oh yeah, like Madball, dude, like yeah. And we used to have a time in our old apartment, and there was a time when a bunch of guys went to ULOL, all punk dudes. So we used to book shows there, and there's some incredible bands that now, like there was a band Have Heart, and they actually, before they became what they are now, which is enormous by hardcore standards, they played to like 15 people at Fox Hall. It's just like so cool to like, oh my god, yeah, we used to do that. Like,
that's like a surreal experience.
Yeah, it really is.
So what you guys do for work?
So I work in the basic Merrimack Valley. I work for a company called Northeast Independent Living Program. And I specifically am a peer specialist. So I utilize my lived experience with, mental health and substance use challenge and trauma and all that stuff to basically go out in the community and talk about different forms of recovery, promote my lived experience, not what recovery is, but what my experience is with it.
So I work for Boston Medical Center on a research study. It's a study funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, so that is federally funded. And the goal is to reduce opioid overdose deaths in selected communities across 4 states over the course of 2 years by 40%. Lowell is one of the communities funded in Massachusetts, so I am their community engagement facilitator. So I kind of am the liaison between the study and the community. And I actually met Mike in my first role out of school because I was an overdose prevention educator. So I was providing naloxone to folks, again, using in the area, family and friends of folks who were using, or just really anyone who wanted it. We strongly believe that Narcan is for everyone, regardless if you use or not. But I did that, so I got hooked up with Mike that way through his work at NILP. And then, we've just been in touch ever since, but Mike's also involved with the study.
What do you guys think, like, the popular thought is around substances, the way society should approach it, and what tends to be the course of action? I
mean, the effects of the war on drugs are still very, very prevalent, especially like when we're talking about a city like Lowell. Just heavy policing of substance use is kind of the major response, right? That's how folks respond to people, right, like experiencing homelessness due to their substance use. Get police involved, get these people out of the way is kind of the MO. If we can arrest our way out of the problem, then it will be fine. This area, and really, again, across Massachusetts as well, Section 35 is used quite a lot. You don't need the consent of the person who's being sectioned. So essentially, a social worker or a police officer or a family member, someone who's a blood relative of somebody who they deem is unsafe for themselves or to other people due to their substance use, that they're a danger, that they can be placed into holding, forced treatment, essentially. That was the initial model, was that folks would you appear before a judge. If the judge says yes, based on your activities, your behaviors, whatever has happened during your substance use, we think that you need treatment. It's just mandated treatment, to be honest with you. However, because there is such a lack of treatment availability, when I say treatment, I'm talking about medications for opioid use disorder, detox, different groups, residential. There is a huge shortage of treatment availability, specifically inpatient, for folks to reside at, so a lot of folks just go to jail. We see that a lot, especially with women in Massachusetts, because there's such a shortage of beds available for folks who identify as women in the state. So folks do go to holding in jail, essentially, where they don't receive any treatment, and they essentially are forced to come off the substance that they've been using and detox off of it, which is very undesirable, very painful. Like, some folks may say addiction is a disease, can be treated as such, right? I'm not gonna pigeonhole any one view of that, but folks are sick. Some folks want to stop using, others don't want to stop using. Folks deserve their freedom of choice for what they choose to do with their lives, and arresting our way out of it or again, sectioning people hasn't worked, has led to a huge increase in overdose deaths. One of the highest risk populations for folks who would pass away from overdose are folks who were either recently released from incarceration or who have been sectioned, because their tolerance will be way lower when they get out of either treatment or jail, and then they're much more susceptible to overdose if they use the same amount that they were typically using beforehand.
Part of the problem is like the stigma of all of this actually exists. It exists in so many places. It's not even funny. It's not just like, you know, I mean, how many times have you heard, do you want to work at McDonald's the rest of your life? It's like, what's so bad about that? Like, if someone wants to do that, what is the problem? And it's the same thing with if someone wants to use, I don't see the problem. Like, that is that person's choice. It's like the intention of using a substance isn't to, you know, I don't say, oh my God, you know what? I feel like burning my entire life down today. I see it as a human condition struggle. Like, that's really what it is like, if I believe that I'm a piece of garbage, or if I've been told through, traumatic events, life experiences, I've been told, we've all been systematically told all these things, the families we grew up in, even the things that we don't remember. And it's like, if this drug, no matter how deadly if that fixes me for a half an hour, you're damn right I'm taking it. There's no way I'm not, because it fixed me. And that is what goes on inside. Like, that's the reason why, because I'm like, oh my God, I want this to work.
What's the correct path that sometimes gets prescribed?
Well, I mean, 9 times out of 10, which it no longer happens, but AA and AA, those were like, you go to those because they've been around for so long. Coercion of any kind, it looks like it works for a period of time. So someone will come into recovery, and I'm sure you've seen it too, where I'll see people at meetings and they're just flying. They have that pink cloud, what we call the pink cloud, where they're just like, oh my God, my life is so beautiful. I love everything. And then they hit this wall because all they've been doing is what others have been telling them, which, you know, can work for people. It's not that, you know, taking suggestions and listening doesn't work. It's that I see it all the time where these clone-like people come out of sober houses and sober living, and they've been indoctrinated with these specific beliefs, and all of a sudden they have no idea who they are. You know, for a very long time there was a long-standing belief that if you take psychiatric medication, let alone, forget about methadone and Suboxone and those types that can help people, but psychiatric medication, you're chewing your booze, you're not sober. There's an ocean of difference between sobriety and recovery. Sobriety is the absence of. Recovery is evolutionary. A person can determine their path. You know, so it's not, you have to do this or this or this. You know, whatever you call yourself in recovery, that's what it is. It's not, it doesn't have to fall in line with anything.
It sounds like there's like, you don't prescribe like a method.
No, absolutely not. No, it's very malleable. The hope is to like break free from certain shackles and paths and let people know that like they're a pathway. A pathway isn't just go to a meeting. No, that's one little formatted option. That's not a pathway. Pathway is what an individual can decide and say, you know what really helps me is to you know, stop using something or doing something is going to protests. Like learning that I have a voice, like that helps people. I know plenty of people that that's what their recovery is. So it just goes to show, like music, art, writing, I mean, anything under the sun can be something that someone uses that gives them that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I know guys that insane heroin and crack addictions. They now microdose mushrooms. They stepped away from AA. They smoke weed regularly, like for fun. And it's like, it goes against everything that they've been taught.
Well, what do you think fuels some of that like mentality?
Fear, indoctrination that substances are inherently bad. So like I'm thinking about even when Like, I was growing up in the early 2000s, like, it was just, again, all of the videos we saw in health class, like, just don't do it. Oh my gosh, like, you're gonna, like, just implode, you'll die, like, you're gonna disappoint your family, all of these things. Even though these are substances that have been used for millennia, like, they've been around for a long ass time, they are medicinal, like, folks, they're medicine for folks. It's escapism, it enhances your day-to-day, whatever substance you're using, whatever, like, reason you have for using it, is up to that person. But people aren't allowed to kind of explore those avenues because these substances are illegal, which again was strategically done. Right, like the over-policing of areas that, you know, historically distributed and used crack cocaine, and heroin as well. Like, it's intentionally done and intentionally marketed to certain populations of people so we can jail them. Again, I'll probably always return to incarceration just because that's the big overarching, right, like, goal there, to keep certain folks silent, keep them out of society, and use their labor for free. However, it's fear. My opinion is just reaching towards complete drug liberation. I mean, we've looked at other countries like Portugal, for example, that decriminalized all substances, and, you know, overdoses go down.
Oh, really?
Overdoses happen because of shame. Overdoses happen because people are using by themselves due to shame. And, you know, needing to use, like, covertly so you don't get arrested, so you don't get caught. If we decriminalize and, you know, not that it's like, oh, it's a free-for-all, everyone use substances, blah, blah, blah. That's not what it is. It's more so just making it safer for people for when they inevitably do. It's just part of our culture, like, as human beings, you know what I mean, to use substances. We use alcohol freely. We have no problem with that. We glorify alcohol use, but it kills much more folks every year than opioids will ever. But we don't talk about that, because that's also tied into, you know, the industry, capitalism. Alcohol makes a lot of money. So we keep it legal. There's no way to rationalize, like, why things are illegal at this. It's really just due to a legacy of racism and capitalism.
Why did it become an opiate crisis when it hit the suburbs? Like, this is not a new thing. This has been going on for a very, very long period of time. When it's people who are disenfranchised, whether it's classist or racist, it's forgotten. But when it hits the white picket fence neighborhoods, you better believe there's going to be an outcry. That's what's happened. Substance use isn't about the substance. It never has been.
Folks are going to do what they're going to do regardless. How can we keep folks safe when they're doing XYZ behavior to keep them as safe as possible? A good example that's really easy to understand is the seatbelts in cars. That's harm reduction. Driving a 3,000-pound vehicle is super dangerous in its own right. So we've, you know, it's a law to wear your seatbelt to keep you safe during that, right? And when we're talking about harm reduction specifically for substance use, it really is around how folks are ingesting their drugs, and then also what's in there, like making sure that what's in their drugs, that they know what's in there to keep them as safe as possible. So some examples of that is, you know, giving folks clean syringes. If they are using intravenously, they can have access to clean syringes to prevent the spread of HIV and Hep C. There's also drug checking. You can buy fentanyl test strips. Unfortunately, they're not like super widely available because they're not evidence-based, so it's tough for them to be funded. But if you use substances or you know someone who does, even if it's just if you're using cocaine that's not an opioid or other substances, you can test it with these strips to see if there's fentanyl in there, because the fentanyl has leaked into a lot of other drug supplies. So even if you don't use opioids yourself, you could be at risk of overdose. Another good example is giving folks what's called naloxone. Narcan is its brand name. But naloxone is actually naloxone hydrochloride is actually like the chemical makeup of what this is. So Narcan is just like a brand name. But so I'll probably use both interchangeably, but just wanted to like put that caveat in there. What naloxone is a overdose reversal drug for opiate overdose specifically. So if someone is overdosing, if they use Narcan, once it enters their bloodstream, it will remove the opioids from the opioid receptors in their brain and kind of put a little blanket over them so that person can't lapse back into overdose, and it will immediately bring them back out. It's not always effective, but it has been shown to be extremely effective, again, for opioids specifically. So giving folks access to that, you know, is to prevent overdose death, because really if people don't have naloxone on hand, there's really no way to come back from an opioid overdose at that point.
Does it require medical training or a license to use?
It doesn't. So it's become extremely available. at least in Massachusetts, with Massachusetts legislation. The state actually has a bunch of state-funded programs that provide naloxone kits to community health centers and other like syringe service programs, which we can talk about too, all these different harm reduction agencies for free, and they can give them out to folks who are interested for free as well. You can also buy naloxone over the counter at the pharmacy. Your copay will depend on what your insurance is, so we always try to encourage people to, find overdose education and naloxone distribution site, one of the state-funded sites, to get naloxone for free. So it's like the least amount of barrier possible. But you also cannot be charged for having it, right? There's no assumption. There is a lot of fear around carrying it, like, oh, if I have this but I don't use opioids, or like, would the police think that I use, or something like that? No, there's no punishment around that. Legally, you can absolutely 100% have it. You can travel with it, you can fly with it, just like any other medication. So, and you don't need a script for it. This is what it looks like, and this is just one version. This is the nasal spray version. You can also inject it. You can have a vial and a syringe, and then there's also this other one that will inject it into folks. The thing like talks to you like an AED machine would, like if you were reviving somebody, and it will inject it into the person. But this is the one that we predominantly use in Massachusetts, and the 4 milligram nasal spray. If someone's overdosing, what you can do is have one of these on hand. You literally just open it up, and then you pull out this little thing. It works just like saline would. So you put it up their nostril, making sure that your fingertips touch their nostril, because you don't want it to be like right at the tip of their nose. You really want to make sure it's going up into their nose. You press this, all 4 milligrams go up one nostril, and that's it. You've given them one dose of 4 milligrams of Narcan. And then from there, you perform what's called rescue breathing. So once they've had the naloxone in their system, they probably won't wake up right away. It's also going to depend on the potency of the drug they've ingested, and again, how much, or like if there's a cocktail of different substances on board, it can also look different. So you want to perform rescue breathing, so as getting that person on their back if you can, and then plugging their nose, tipping their chin up, and then providing them with one breath into their mouth every 5 seconds. And that's just to keep the flow of oxygen moving while the naloxone is doing its job. Anywhere between like 30 seconds to about 2 minutes, that person could come to if the naloxone is effective. Some folks might need more. And then we always encourage that folks call 911 as soon as they see someone. Really, that was the first step. I should have said that first. Call 911, then do all of this stuff, so that help can be on the way if necessary.
Now, if someone is, let's say, showing symptoms of an overdose, but isn't necessarily overdosing, is Narcan harmful in that way?
It's not harmful inherently. I should mention that too. Even if you're somebody who doesn't have opioids in their system, like if I shot that up my nose right now, nothing would happen. It will only have an effect if there are opioids on board. No, it's not harmful. Will it feel like absolute crap for somebody? Yes. So if they're not overdosing, but they do have opioids on board, it puts you into what's called acute withdrawal, and that feels really, really horrible. Is the best way to say that. It just feels like the flu times a million. It's bad. Same thing for if someone's like kind of coming off opioids cold turkey. Like if you're not like tapering down, it would feel like that. And that's also why people use often, is to kind of keep those feelings at bay. Definitely make sure that person isn't overdosed beforehand, which the signs of overdose would be that person is unresponsive. That's kind of the major thing that you're looking out for. A good way to tell is to just yell at that person, be like, hey, like I'm going to Narcan you, or like, are you okay? They might have blue lips or blue fingertips, could have pinpoint pupils, and they might be either not breathing at all, have very shallow breathing, like only breathing like once a minute or so, or you can hear like a snoring type of noise. And that indicates that somebody's going into respiratory distress. You can also do what's called a sternal rub. So if you like expose these knuckles here and just rub as hard as you can on somebody's sternum, it hurts like hell. So if they're not completely knocked out, then they would respond to that. Same thing with right under the nose on the upper lip. This also would hurt a lot if you were doing it with pressure on somebody. So those are also ways that you can like make sure that somebody's just not in a really deep nod, that they're actually overdosing is that as well.
You see a drug problem. That's the first thing. And then it's like peeling back. Once you peel back, you're like, oh, that's where you see housing and employment and family and abuse and trauma and mental health and, all this stuff. That's when you start to see the whole picture of what it actually is, and that it's a total systemic failure. Obviously, everyone knows the personal accountability angle of using substances, right? But it's this really insidious, almost hatred that started so far back. I mean, we look at people who were revered, like Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac died of alcoholism, like a brutal death. William Burroughs, his counterpart, did opiates until he was in his 90s. But I know so few people that actually know about that side of it. Like, you don't want to somehow taint this. Where the consequences, sure, there's consequences to literally everything. It's an issue of morality. People want to moralize and somehow find like a pedestal to stand on and look down at these people. It's like, you go just down Veterans Highway in Lowell and the Top Donut, there's a couple that goes out there every day. And they stem. Maybe they're nodding, maybe they're sick. They're dehumanized, you know? Dehumanized because of this idea that like they chose to be in this state.
Just humanize people, expand your mind a little bit and be like, okay, even if this person's not like me, they still are worthy of respect and worthy of their own humanity, right? I think that's it, is seeing like everyone is still worthy of having their basic human rights met.
What are some things that like people at home can do to like, I suppose, humanize more?
Framing addiction as a disease where it can be treated with medication if need be. It can be treated with support groups. It can be treated by, addressing ACEs, adverse childhood events, and trauma and everything that Mike has mentioned, right? Just like how diabetes is treated with medication and support and all of these other things, right? And like we're totally fine with people being on medications for diabetes, which when we're talking type 2 diabetes, and I'm going to say a blanket statement, but with a grain of salt here, like it's caused by individual behavior, just like drug use is, led by individual behavior. It's the result of choices, right? It's a consequence, if you will. So I think using the addiction as a disease mentality helps expand out. I would caution against like making that like the only way you see it. But again, I understand like it's a good starting point. But it's hard. Like, I understand if you've grown up and you've been told that folks who use substances are not worthy of housing or dignity or anything. There's so many resources now to get us out of that closed-minded thinking that I will say, like, yeah, it's everyone's personal responsibility to find out what they need to humanize people.
It's this silent mythology. If we're civilized, so there must be a primal people that are less than us. Like, I look at our civilization, I say, what a great joke. Like, we are so, like, certainly well cemented. I look at the entire world and I say, we're all addicted. You say junkie. I mean, you hear the word junkie on TV, especially like procedural police shows, and this total just dehumanizing process that is like, oh, if I see it on TV and this is what police do, then they're the enemy. I've been seeing more and more often, like, kill your local drug dealer. And it's like, do you see, like, that it's a 14-year-old kid you're talking about. Like, and the one that's 30 that's doing it, he was a 14-year-old, 12-year-old kid that started. Why don't you ask him about how he grew up? If I go order a coffee and someone screws up my coffee and I get mad, I yell at this person. That does no good. I may get the right coffee. I have no idea what that person's going through in that day. If we look at each other and say, I have no idea what's going on with you, I'm going to pause before I say or do something. Why don't I try to understand your story before I write your narrative for you?
Well, I think I'd like to wrap up this show with maybe providing a few resources, maybe documentaries or books that you might recommend.
I would say check out Dr. Carl Hart. That he is absolutely fabulous. He's written a bunch of books, but he's the doctor that made the controversial statement, I recreationally use heroin. And so he challenges everything we think about substance use. I mean, he is just brilliant. Gabor Mate, he's one that is working with like the deep learning theories. I don't feel good. I need to change that immediately. Where does that come from? Why do I think I need this thing to fill this? Why do I think I have a void? Where does this come from?
Researching the Harm Reduction Coalition, they're based out of New York. They're definitely like leading the way nationally for like true like harm reduction, person-centered harm reduction. They also are like all over social media. So if you start, like if you're on Instagram or something and you do Harm Reduction Coalition, then you'll find like all different types of related accounts. And then you can see like what kind of harm reduction movements are happening either in your local area or across the country. I would also recommend going on the Massachusetts Department of Public Health website and literally just typing in Narcan, because then you'll be able to find all of the sites where you can access naloxone across the state. And again, any pharmacy, you're able to walk in, ask for naloxone. You should not be questioned. Legally, you don't need to be asked or have any like reason to ask for naloxone or Narcan. So if you're interested in having a kit or learning more about it, go to your pharmacy or go on, again, the Mass DPH website where you can find more information.
Thank you guys so much for your stories and these resources and your little Lego creations. Can we like just revisit these really quick and go over what we created? All right, so this is my city. I haven't named it yet. I'm gonna have to go into a deep Brazilian meditation before it comes to me. But what you see here is in the foreground is the fertile, untouched rainforest area, and then as you get further out back, we have grazing cattle. We have a tortured soul, this demigod who powers the city. We pretty much just put him on a treadmill and make him go.
He's been promoted.
The rhino's stronghold. And the rhino has finally defeated humanity. So this is sort of my pseudo misanthropic little temple to animals.
I don't know. I'm attracted to all the colors that I picked out, and like this was supposed to be like water, with the palm tree or whatever, and then like a bridge, but it's not to scale. So then I was trying to do something over here, and then because I like this because this looks like a grain elevator. In like an old like Buffalo, New York is what it looks like, because they have a bunch of grain elevators there because that was the industry. So this is, I don't know. This is just a stream of consciousness that I'm also like, ooh, it's post-industrial, cool.
The last thing before we go is I'm going to tear off this temporary tattoo and see if a 20-year-old tattoo still has what it takes to stick on skin. How is that?
Yeah! Wow!
Look at that. Look at that, guys. Thank you so much, Mike and Lauren, for coming through.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys have a good day, too. Thank you for watching. This has been the Martian Radio Show. Time to clean up my Legos.